You ever have one of those moments where someone says something so cold, so heartless, that the room actually feels colder? That's what it felt like the day my own daughter looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Mom, you should probably find somewhere else to go die." Yeah, those were the exact words. And the crazy part? 3 days later, that same daughter was being handcuffed outside a fancy downtown restaurant, while the police read her fraud charges. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me rewind a little. My name is Linda Parker, and 2 months ago I was just a 68-year-old widow living quietly in Charleston, South Carolina. For 45 years I'd been married to a man named Richard Parker. He ran a consulting company, wore tailored suits even on Sundays, and had this habit of organizing everything down to the last paperclip. Bills filed, insurance labeled, legal papers locked in a cabinet that looked like it belonged in the Pentagon. Me, I was the woman who cooked Sunday dinners, hosted holiday parties, and made sure the house always smelled like lemon polish and fresh bread. I never cared about money. That was Richard's department. Then one Tuesday morning, out of nowhere, Richard collapsed in the kitchen. Heart attack. Just like that. 1 minute we were arguing about whether the neighbor's dog kept digging up our garden. Next minute I was riding in the back of an ambulance holding his hand while machines screamed around us. He didn't make it. After 45 years together, the world just stopped. The funeral came and went in a blur of casseroles, sympathy cards, and people telling me things like, "He's in a better place." But the person who seemed most concerned about me was my daughter, Ashley. Ashley had always been, well, ambitious. Designer handbags, luxury vacations, a husband who worked on Wall Street named Mark, and 2 kids who had more expensive toys than the average toy store. At the funeral she hugged me dramatically and whispered, "Mom, I'm gonna take care of everything." At the time, that sounded comforting. Turns out it should have sounded like a warning. Because about 2 weeks after Richard died, Ashley started bringing over brochures. Retirement communities, senior living apartments, condos for active adults. At first I thought she was just worried about me living alone. Then the conversation started getting pushy. "Mom, that house is way too big for you. You can't maintain all that property by yourself. You deserve somewhere simple." Funny thing about grief. It makes you trust people you probably shouldn't. So I didn't argue. But one afternoon, Ashley showed up with her husband Mark and 2 giant suitcases. That's when the truth finally came out. Ashley walked into the living room like she owned the place. Actually, she thought she did. "Mom," she said, crossing her arms. "Mark got a promotion and we've been thinking, this house is perfect for our family." What do you mean? Her smile tightened. "Well, according to Dad's will, everything belongs to me now." I felt my stomach drop. The house, the investments, all of it. "That's impossible," I said quietly. Ashley shrugged. "Dad knew I'd managed the money better than you. 45 years of marriage. And suddenly I was just the housekeeper." But Ashley wasn't done. She glanced at my suitcase sitting by the stairs and said the sentence that changed everything. "Mom, you should probably find somewhere else to go die. You're not really useful anymore." 3 hours later I was sitting in a cheap roadside motel with 2 suitcases and $200 cash. That night, lying on a lumpy mattress that smelled like cigarette smoke, I started thinking about something. My husband Richard had been many things. Stubborn, old-fashioned, obsessed with paperwork. But one thing he had never been was cruel. And the will Ashley described? It didn't sound like him. Not even a little. So the next morning, I did something my daughter never expected. I got on a city bus and went to visit Richard's lawyer. Because if there's one thing my husband loved more than golf, it was making sure every last detail of his plans was airtight. And when the lawyer opened Richard's real will, that's when I realized something unbelievable. My daughter hadn't just lied to me. She had committed the biggest mistake of her life. And by the time she figured it out, the police were already on their way. But what the lawyer showed me next. Oh honey, that's where this story really begins. You know that feeling when your whole world collapses and then suddenly flips upside down again? That's exactly what happened the moment Mr. Daniel Whitaker, my late husband's lawyer, opened Richard's will. His office sat on the 12th floor of a glass building downtown. The kind of place where everything smelled like leather chairs and expensive coffee. I remember sitting across from him clutching my purse like it contained the last pieces of my life. He looked surprised to see me. "Linda," he said, adjusting his glasses. "I've been trying to reach you for weeks." My stomach twisted. "Really?" "Yes. Your daughter told us you were traveling and needed time before discussing the estate." Traveling? That lie rolled off Ashley's tongue so easily it almost impressed me. "I wasn't traveling," I said quietly. "I was being thrown out of my own house." Mr. Whitaker froze. "Excuse me." So I told him everything. About Ashley arriving with suitcases. About her claiming Richard left everything to her. About the motel room that cost $49 a night. About the $200 she handed me like I was a waitress getting a tip. By the time I finished talking, the lawyer's face had turned the same color as a ripe tomato. "Linda," he said slowly, pulling a thick file from his desk drawer. "That is absolutely impossible." My heart pounded. "Why?" "Because that's not what Richard's will says." The room suddenly felt very quiet. He slid a document across the desk. At the bottom was Richard's signature. The one I'd seen on birthday cards and anniversary notes for 45 years. Mr. Whitaker cleared his throat and began reading. "I, Richard Thomas Parker, being of sound mind and body, leave the following assets to my beloved wife, Linda Parker." He paused, then looked up at me. "Our primary residence located at 214 Willow Creek Drive." My breath caught. "The house?" I whispered. He nodded. "The house, the land, and all personal property." I felt dizzy. Ashley had kicked me out of my own house. But Mr. Whitaker kept reading. "In addition, I leave 70% of all financial holdings, investments, and accounts to Linda Parker." He flipped to another page. "Current estimated value $22 million. The number hit me like a thunderclap. 22 million. My fingers gripped the chair. "I'm sorry, did you say million?" Mr. Whitaker gave a small smile. "Yes. Your husband was quite successful." I sat there staring at the papers. All this time Ashley had been acting like I was some helpless old woman who couldn't understand money. Turns out I'd been thrown out while sitting on a fortune. But the biggest surprise hadn't even arrived yet. Mr. Whitaker turned to another section. "To my daughter, Ashley Parker Reynolds, I leave $10 million to be held in trust." Okay, so Ashley hadn't been left out entirely. But then the lawyer continued reading. "The trust funds will be released when she turns 45 years old, provided she treats my wife with respect, care, and dignity following my death." The lawyer looked up slowly. "If she fails to do so, the entire trust transfers to Linda Parker." Silence filled the office. My brain tried to process what that meant. Ashley had already turned 39. She was expecting $10 million someday. But instead, she had kicked me out, called me useless, told me to go die somewhere. Which meant, "Oh my God," I whispered. Mr. Whitaker nodded. Yes. Ashley had just lost her inheritance. All of it. The full $10 million now legally belonged to me. Which meant my total inheritance wasn't $22 million. It was $32 million. I leaned back in the chair, stunned. For a moment, the entire situation felt almost funny. Ashley had tried to grab everything. And by doing that, she triggered the exact clause that gave me even more. Mr. Whitaker closed the folder. "Linda, what your daughter did may qualify as elder fraud." Fraud? If she forged documents or misrepresented the will, that's a serious crime. My head spun. I wasn't the kind of person who called the police. I baked cookies for neighbors. I sent Christmas cards. I didn't press charges against my own child. But then I remembered Ashley's voice in the driveway. "Find somewhere else to go die." Something inside my chest hardened. What happens now? I asked. The lawyer leaned back in his chair. Well, first we freeze the accounts. Second, we notify the authorities. And third, a slow smile crossed his face, we call your daughter and tell her she's about to have a very bad day. My phone buzzed in my purse right then. Ashley. Of course it was Ashley. I answered. Mom, where are you? She snapped. The bank says Dad's accounts are frozen. I looked across the desk at Mr. Whitaker. Then I said the words my daughter never expected to hear. I'm at your father's lawyer's office, sweetheart. Silence. Then Ashley said nervously, why? I smiled for the first time in weeks. Because we just read the real will. Another silence. Longer this time. And when Ashley finally spoke again, her voice had changed. Because deep down, she already knew. Her little plan had just exploded. And in about 3 hours, the police would be knocking on her door. But what Ashley didn't realize yet was that her nightmare was only just beginning. Because someone else had been watching this whole situation unfold. Someone who knew secrets about my husband. Secrets that would soon change everything again. Have you ever heard panic trying to pretend it's confidence? Because that's exactly what my daughter sounded like on the phone after I told her I'd just seen the real will. There was a long pause. The kind where you can almost hear someone's brain spinning. Then Ashley laughed. Not a normal laugh. One of those forced, tight little laughs people use when they're trying to stay in control. Mom, you must be confused, she said. Confused. I glanced across the desk at Mr. Whitaker, who was already shaking his head. No, sweetheart, I said calmly. I'm not confused. Another pause. Then Ashley's voice sharpened. What exactly did that lawyer tell you? Well, I said slowly. For starters, that you lied. Dead silence. According to the real will, I continued. I inherited the house, 70% of your father's assets, and something else. I let that hang for a moment. Ashley took the bait. What's something else? The $10 million you were supposed to get. Now she laughed again. But this time it sounded nervous. That's ridiculous. Dad left that to me. Yes, I said sweetly. He did. Another pause. Until you kicked me out of my own house. On the other end of the phone, I heard muffled whispering. Mark. Her husband. I imagined them standing in my kitchen, frantically trying to figure out how much trouble they were in. Ashley came back on the line. Mom, listen, you're obviously very emotional right now. There it was. The classic move. If a woman disagrees with you, just say she's emotional. Your father's estate is complicated, she continued. You wouldn't understand the legal details. That's when something inside me snapped. For 45 years I'd been treated like the quiet one. The supportive wife. The woman who smiled politely while the important conversations happened around her. But here's the thing about quiet people. We hear everything. Ashley, I said calmly, did you know there's a clause in the will about how you treat me after your father's death? Silence. No, she said cautiously. Well, there is. I leaned back in my chair. And it says if you fail to treat me with dignity and respect, your inheritance goes to me instead. On the other end of the phone something crashed. Probably a glass. Ashley's voice came back shaky. That's not possible. Oh, it's very possible. Another pause. Then suddenly Ashley's tone changed completely. The anger disappeared. Now she sounded desperate. Mom, maybe we should meet somewhere and talk about this. Mr. Whitaker mouthed 2 words to me across the desk. Don't. But I had no intention of letting Ashley control this situation anymore. We can talk, I said. Relief flooded her voice. Good. I knew you'd be reasonable. Sure, I said. At the courthouse. Her breath caught. What? You know, where fraud cases usually get sorted out. Ashley went completely silent. Then Mark's voice came through the phone in the background. Hang up. Ashley ignored him. Mom, she whispered. You wouldn't actually call the police on your own daughter. For a moment, the old version of me hesitated. The mother who remembered bedtime stories, school recitals, Birthday cakes with too many candles. But then I remembered the motel room. The $200. And the words she'd said in the driveway. Find somewhere else to go die. My voice turned cold. Watch me. I hung up. Mr. Whitaker let out a long breath. Well, he said, that went about as expected. What happens now? I asked. Now we call the police. Within an hour his office turned into something that looked like a command center. Phone calls. Documents being scanned. Bank accounts frozen. Apparently when $32 million and forged legal papers are involved, people move fast. Around 3 in the afternoon a detective walked into the office. Tall. Serious. The kind of woman who didn't waste time with small talk. Mrs. Parker, she said, shaking my hand. I'm Detective Ramirez. She opened a folder on the desk. Inside were copies of the fake documents Ashley had shown me. These forgeries are very well done, she said. Which means someone helped her. I didn't even have to ask. Mark, I said. The detective nodded. Your son-in-law works in finance, correct? Yes. That explains it. My stomach tightened. What does this mean? It means your daughter didn't just lie to you, she said. She committed felony fraud. Right then my phone buzzed again. Ashley. Another text. Mom, please don't do this. Then another message. Think about the grandchildren. I showed the phone to Detective Ramirez. She sighed. Classic manipulation tactic. Maybe she was right. Because for a second, I almost felt guilty. Almost. Then a third message appeared. We can fix this if you just talk to us. I typed back one sentence. We will talk. In court. Across the room Mr. Whitaker smiled. But none of us knew yet that Ashley and Mark had already started making their own plan. And that plan involved a secret about my husband. A secret so dangerous it could destroy everything, including the $32 million I had just inherited. When people think about revenge, they imagine screaming matches or dramatic confrontations. But the truth? The most satisfying revenge is quiet, organized, and handled by professionals with badges. That afternoon, Detective Ramirez sat across from me and carefully explained what was about to happen. If your daughter forged documents and used them to gain access to your husband's estate, she said, that's multiple counts of fraud. And if your son-in-law helped create the forgeries. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Prison was a pretty obvious ending to that story. I nodded slowly. Will they be arrested today? Most likely. There was something strange about hearing those words. A mother is supposed to protect her child. But Ashley hadn't acted like a daughter. She had acted like a thief. And thieves face consequences. Still, the idea of seeing my own child in handcuffs made my chest feel tight. Detective Ramirez seemed to notice. Mrs. Parker, she said gently, you're not doing this to her. She did it to herself. Maybe she was right. But hearing that didn't make the situation feel any less surreal. About an hour later my phone rang again. This time it wasn't Ashley. It was Mark. My son-in-law. The man who had helped drive me to that miserable motel. Linda, he said, using my first name like we were business partners. Let's be reasonable here. Reasonable. That word again. What do you want, Mark? A conversation, he replied smoothly. Victoria, sorry Ashley, is under a lot of stress right now. Stress. Right. Because fraud investigations tend to do that to people. You involved the police, he continued. That seems unnecessary. I almost laughed. You forged legal documents. It wasn't like that. Oh really? Silence. Then he sighed. Look, maybe mistakes were made. Mistakes. Like accidentally grabbing someone else's coffee order. Not forging a will and stealing $32 million. We can fix this, Mark said. How? We return the house to you. I blinked. Return the house? The house that was already mine? How generous, I said dryly. And he continued quickly. We work out a financial arrangement. What kind of arrangement? $2 million. I leaned back in my chair. $2 million. He was offering me $2 million to ignore the theft of $32 million. Let me get this straight, I said slowly. You helped my daughter steal my inheritance, throw me out of my house, and now you're offering me a discount to forget about it. Linda, this doesn't have to get ugly. Mark, I said calmly, it already is. He lowered his voice. You should think about the grandchildren. There it was again. The guilt button. Ashley had always known exactly which emotional strings to pull. But Mark didn't know me nearly as well as he thought. The grandchildren, I said quietly, will grow up learning something very important. What's that? That actions have consequences. The line went silent. Then he spoke again, but the politeness was gone. You're making a mistake. No, Iraplia. You did. I hung up. Detective Ramirez raised an eyebrow. Settlement offer? $2 million. She snorted. They must be desperate. An hour later we got confirmation. Ashley and Mark were having dinner at a fancy steakhouse downtown. Celebrating. Apparently they still believed this whole situation was a misunderstanding. Detective Ramirez closed her notebook. Well, she said, standing up. Let's not keep them waiting. I didn't go to the restaurant. I stayed at the lawyer's office. But later that night the detective called with an update. And I will admit, I poured myself a glass of wine before answering. Mrs. Parker, she said, the arrest went smoothly. How did Ashley react? There was a small pause. She screamed. I pictured it perfectly. Ashley in her designer dress. The restaurant full of people staring. The police reading her rights. She demanded to call her lawyer, the detective continued. Does she have one? Her husband's golf buddy. I almost laughed. Apparently fraud wasn't his specialty. And Mark? I asked. He was arrested at his office this morning. Turns out investigators had already traced the forged documents. The printing company used to create them belonged to one of Mark's business partners, which meant the fraud trail led straight back to him. When I hung up the phone, I sat quietly for a while. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. Not happy, not triumphant, just calm. But the story wasn't over yet. Because the next morning I returned to my house for the first time since Ashley threw me out. And what I found inside changed everything I thought I knew about my husband, including where our $32 million really came from. And trust me, the truth was far more dangerous than anything Ashley had done. The first night I walked back into my house after everything happened, it didn't feel like victory. It felt strange, like stepping into someone else's life. For 45 years that house had been our home. Richard's favorite armchair still sat by the fireplace. His golf magazines were stacked neatly on the coffee table. The faint smell of his aftershave still lingered in the hallway. But something else had changed. Ashley had already started moving her things in. Designer shoes by the stairs. Expensive coats hanging in my closet. Makeup scattered across my bathroom counter. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I grabbed 3 trash bags. Within 30 minutes, everything Ashley owned was sitting in plastic bags on the front porch. She could pick it up whenever she got out of jail. I wasn't interested in storing it. After that, the house finally felt quiet again. Too quiet. I poured myself a glass of wine and wandered down the hallway until I reached the one room I hadn't entered since Richard died. His office. Richard loved that room more than any place in the house. Mahogany desk. Shelves packed with leather-bound books. A massive filing cabinet that probably weighed more than a small car. And of course, everything was perfectly organized. That was Richard. The man labeled everything. Taxes. Insurance. Business records. Even the Christmas decorations had inventory lists. I sat in his desk chair and slowly opened the top drawer. Inside were dozens of folders. Contracts. Receipts. Investment reports. At first everything looked normal. But after about 20 minutes of flipping through paperwork, I noticed something odd. Several payments were listed under consulting fees. Large payments. hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time. But the companies paying them had strange names. Northbridge Solutions, Clear Harbor Logistics, Redwood Consulting. None of them sounded familiar, which was strange. Richard loved talking about business, but I had never heard him mention any of those companies. I frowned and pulled out another folder. More consulting fees. More strange companies. More enormous payments. My stomach tightened. Something about this didn't feel right. I opened the bottom drawer of the cabinet. That's when I found a small black notebook. No label. No title. Just Richard's neat handwriting inside. At first the pages looked like numbers. Dates. Amounts. Initials. But after a few minutes I realized something. These weren't normal business records. They were coded. Payments matched specific dates. Initials matched certain companies. And every few pages, there were notes. Short ones. Like reminders. Meeting confirmed. Shipment cleared. Payment delivered. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Because suddenly the consulting fees didn't look like consulting anymore. They looked like something else. Something illegal. I grabbed my phone and called Mr. Whitaker. He answered on the second ring. Linda, is everything all right? I'm not sure, I said. What do you mean? I'm sitting in Richard's office, and I think I just found something strange. Strange how? There are payments here that don't make sense. I explained the notebook. The companies. The huge deposits. The coded notes. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then he sighed. Linda, don't touch anything else. My heart skipped. Why? Because if what you're describing is what I think it is. His voice lowered. This could involve federal crimes. My mouth went dry. What kind of crimes? Possibly money laundering. The words hit me like a punch. That's impossible. Is it? I stared at the notebook again. All those strange companies. All those unexplained payments. Richard wouldn't do that, I whispered. He was the most honest man I ever knew. Mr. Whitaker sounded careful now. Sometimes people have parts of their lives their families never see. I didn't like hearing that. Not one bit. What should I do? I asked. Close the office. Lock the door. Don't move anything. And tomorrow morning. His voice turned serious. I'm bringing in a financial investigator. I ended the call and sat there in silence. 45 years of marriage. And suddenly I was wondering if I had really known my husband at all. Outside, the sun was setting. The house was quiet. But the notebook sat on the desk like a ticking bomb. Because if Richard had been involved in something illegal, then the $32 million I inherited might not actually belong to me. And worse, Ashley and Mark might already know about it. Which meant their next move wouldn't be fraud. It would be blackmail. And if that happened, the real war was about to begin. The next morning I woke up before the sun. Not because of an alarm. Because my brain refused to shut off. That black notebook in Richard's office had kept me awake all night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those numbers again. Huge payments. Strange company names. Notes that sounded more like secret transactions than business meetings. By the time my coffee finished brewing, my stomach was already in knots. At exactly 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Mr. Whitaker stood outside with a woman I had never seen before. She looked sharp. Mid-40s maybe. Dark hair pulled into a tight bun. Eyes that noticed everything. Linda, the lawyer said gently. This is Carla Jensen. Financial investigator. Carla shook my hand firmly. Mrs. Parker, I specialize in complex financial cases. Something about the way she said that word, cases, made my chest tighten. We walked straight to Richard's office. The moment Carla stepped inside, she began studying the room like a detective at a crime scene. She photographed the desk, opened drawers carefully, flipped through folders with quiet concentration. Then she picked up the black notebook. For a few minutes she said nothing, just turned pages slowly. Her expression grew more serious with each one. Finally she closed it. Mrs. Parker, she said quietly. How long was your husband running his consulting company? Almost 20 years. She nodded slowly. And you were never involved in the finances? No. Did you ever notice unusual clients or business trips? Richard traveled a lot, I admitted. But consulting firms do that. Carla looked at Mr. Whitaker. Then back at me. I'm going to be honest with you. I braced myself. This notebook strongly suggests your husband was laundering money. The room went silent. No, I said immediately. There has to be another explanation. I hope so, she replied calmly. But the patterns are very clear. She spread several documents across the desk. These companies appear to be shell corporations. What does that mean? I asked. They exist on paper, but not in reality. My heart began pounding. So where was the money coming from? Carla hesitated. Possibly organized crime. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Richard? My quiet, organized husband who spent weekends gardening and watching baseball? Connected to criminals? It didn't make sense. But the evidence on the desk was hard to ignore. How long? I whispered. Carla flipped through the notebook again. Based on these records, at least 10 years. 10 years. That meant half our marriage had been built on a lie. And something else suddenly hit me. If this money is illegal. I swallowed hard. Then the inheritance might be illegal too. Mr. Whitaker nodded grimly. That's correct. My hands started shaking. What happens if the government finds out? Carla answered calmly. They could seize everything. The house? Yes. The investments? Yes. All $32 million. The number echoed in my head like a bomb going off. One moment I thought I was the wealthiest woman in Charleston. The next moment I might lose everything. And worse, I might even face legal trouble for unknowingly benefiting from it. I sank into Richard's chair. 45 years together. And I was only now discovering the truth about the man I married. But before I could say anything else, my phone rang. Ashley. Of course it was Ashley. Carla and Mr. Whitaker exchanged a look. Answer it, Carla whispered. I picked up. Ashley sounded calmer than she had the day before. Too calm. Mom, she said, we need to talk. What about? Dad. My stomach dropped. You know something, I said. Of course I do. There was a pause. Then she said something that made the room feel 10 degrees colder. Kevin's lawyers discovered some interesting information about Dad's business. Kevin. Even from jail, my son-in-law was still pulling strings. What kind of information? I asked carefully. The kind that could make the government take every dollar you inherited. Carla's eyes narrowed across the room. Ashley continued smoothly. So here's what's going to happen. I could practically hear her smiling. Kevin's legal team is meeting with federal investigators tomorrow. My chest tightened. They're prepared to share everything they know. Unless? I asked quietly. Ashley didn't even hesitate. Unless we make a deal. What kind of deal? You keep the house. Her voice was sweet now. And $5 million. $5 million. Which meant the rest would disappear. And you drop the charges against us. There it was. Blackmail. Ashley and Kevin had turned the tables. If I didn't cooperate, they would destroy the entire inheritance. I looked at Carla. She was already shaking her head slowly. Ashley's voice turned cold. Think carefully, Mom. Because if you refuse, she paused, you'll lose everything. I stared at the phone. For the first time since this nightmare started, I didn't know what to do. But Ashley had just made one critical mistake. She assumed I was still the same weak woman she'd thrown out of my house. And she had no idea. I was already planning my next move. A move that would bring the FBI straight into this war. And when that happened, Ashley and Kevin wouldn't just lose their inheritance. They'd lose their freedom. There's a moment in every crisis where you realize something important. You can either panic, or you can fight. After Ashley hung up the phone that afternoon, The house went completely silent. I sat there staring at the dark screen in my hand. My daughter had just tried to blackmail me. Not only that, she was threatening to destroy the entire inheritance by exposing my husband's suspected crimes. $32 million. Gone. The house. Gone. Everything Richard had left behind erased. And somehow Ashley thought I would simply surrender. Across the desk, Carla Jensen crossed her arms. "Well," she said calmly. "That escalated quickly." Mr. Whitaker rubbed his forehead. "They're playing a dangerous game." I looked up slowly. "What do you mean?" Carla leaned against the desk. "Your daughter and son-in-law think they're holding leverage. They believe they discovered a secret. But here's the problem." She tapped the notebook with her finger. "They don't know the full story yet." I frowned. "What story?" Carla opened one of the folders she had photographed earlier. "These transactions," she said, pointing at a series of numbers, "don't behave like typical money laundering operations." "How so?" "Most criminals hide their tracks. These records," she paused, "are almost too organized." That sounded exactly like Richard. Meticulous. Precise. Obsessive about details. But if he was laundering money, I asked, why would he keep records this detailed? Carla looked thoughtful. "That's exactly the question we need answered." Mr. Whitaker cleared his throat. "There's another issue." "What?" "If Kevin's lawyers really do contact federal investigators tomorrow." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The government would freeze everything. My inheritance. My accounts. Possibly even the house. So what do we do? I asked quietly. Carla looked directly at me. "We get ahead of them." "How?" "By contacting the FBI ourselves." The word hung in the air like thunder. The FBI. This situation had officially moved far beyond family drama. Mr. Whitaker nodded slowly. "That may actually be our best option." "But if Richard was involved in criminal activity," I said. Carla finished the sentence. "Then the government will find out eventually anyway." She leaned forward. "But if you come forward voluntarily, explain that you had no knowledge of it. You'll be treated as a witness, not a suspect." That sounded slightly better. Still terrifying, but better. I stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the street looked peaceful. Neighbors walking dogs. Kids riding bicycles. Normal life. Meanwhile, inside this house, everything was falling apart. "I spent 45 years married to that man," I said quietly. "And now I'm about to tell federal agents he might have been a criminal." Carla's voice softened. "You're telling them the truth. And the truth matters." I thought about Ashley. The way she had smiled when she kicked me out. The way she casually told me to go die somewhere else. Then I imagined her sitting in a jail cell, convinced she was still winning, that she still had control. Maybe it was time she learned otherwise. I turned back to Carla. "Can you arrange a meeting? With the FBI?" "Yes." She nodded. "I know someone who handles financial crime investigations." "Good." Mr. Whitaker looked at me carefully. "Linda, are you sure?" "No," I said honestly. "But I know one thing." "What's that?" "I'm done letting Ashley manipulate my life." Carla smiled slightly. "Then let's do this properly." Within an hour she was on the phone arranging a meeting. Tomorrow morning. Federal Building downtown. Special Agent Elena Martinez. Apparently she specialized in organized financial crime. Which meant tomorrow, I would be sitting across from a federal investigator explaining how my husband might have been laundering millions of dollars. I poured another glass of wine that night. Not because I wanted to celebrate. Because I needed the courage. But what I didn't know yet was that Ashley and Kevin had already started making their next move. And their plan involved something far more dangerous than fraud. Because they weren't just planning to expose Richard's secrets anymore. They were planning to use those secrets to make a deal with the FBI themselves. A deal that would give them immunity, while leaving me to take the fall for everything. But the next morning, When I finally sat down across from Special Agent Martinez, she revealed a truth about my husband that none of us had expected. A truth that would flip this entire story upside down and turn Ashley and Kevin's plan into the worst mistake of their lives. The federal building downtown looked exactly how you'd expect. Cold, gray, and about as welcoming as a dentist's chair. The next morning, Carla drove me there while Mr. Whitaker followed behind in his car. None of us talked much during the ride. There wasn't really anything left to say, because in about 10 minutes, I was going to sit down with the FBI and explain that my late husband might have been laundering millions of dollars. Not exactly the kind of conversation you prepare for over breakfast. We passed through security, rode the elevator to the 6th floor, and were led into a conference room that looked painfully official. Metal table, plain chairs, no windows. A woman in a dark blazer walked in a moment later. She looked to be in her early 40s, with sharp eyes that seemed to evaluate everything at once. "Mrs. Parker," she said, offering her hand. "I'm Special Agent Elena Martinez." Her handshake was firm but not aggressive. "Thank you for meeting with me," she added. "Of course," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Carla and Mr. Whitaker sat beside me as Agent Martinez opened a thick folder on the table. "So," she said calmly, "your investigator mentioned you may have information regarding suspicious financial activity connected to your husband." I nodded slowly. Then I told her everything. About the notebook, the shell companies, the consulting payments that didn't make sense, Ashley's blackmail threat, Kevin's lawyers threatening to contact federal investigators. Agent Martinez listened without interrupting. She simply took notes. When I finished, the room went quiet. Finally, she leaned back in her chair. "Well," she said thoughtfully, "that's very interesting." My stomach tightened. "Interesting how?" Agent Martinez flipped open another folder. "This may surprise you, Mrs. Parker." She slid a document across the table. I stared at it. It was a photograph of Richard, but not the Richard the first knew. He was younger in the photo, wearing a suit and standing beside two men I had never seen before. Behind them was a federal seal. "What is this?" I asked quietly. Agent Martinez folded her hands. "That's your husband at a meeting with federal agents 12 years ago." I blinked. "I don't understand. Your husband was working with us." The words took a moment to sink in. "Working with you?" "Yes. As an informant." The room seemed to tilt sideways. "You're saying Richard worked for the FBI?" In a manner of speaking. Agent Martinez pointed at the financial records Carla had collected. "The money you discovered was part of a long-term undercover operation." My mind raced. Undercover? Your husband's consulting company was used as a front. A front for what? For tracking money moving through several organized crime groups. I stared at her in disbelief. "You're telling me my husband spent 10 years pretending to launder money for the FBI? Agent Martinez nodded. "He helped us map financial networks across 3 states. Carla leaned forward. "Then the payments in the notebook were documented transactions used to build federal cases." My heart pounded. "But the money itself was real." "Yes," the agent confirmed. "And your husband was authorized to retain a percentage of it as part of the operation." Suddenly everything made sense. The strange companies, the secret records, the unexplained income. Richard hadn't been a criminal. He had been playing one. "For 12 years he helped us gather evidence," Agent Martinez continued. "His cooperation led to dozens of arrests and the seizure of over $200 million. $200 million. I felt like I might faint. Why didn't he ever tell me? I whispered. Agent Martinez's expression softened. Undercover operations require absolute secrecy. Even from family. The room fell quiet again. Then something else clicked in my head. Ashley and Kevin. Yes, Agent Martinez said, already understanding. They believe your husband was involved in criminal activity. But they don't know he was working with us. Which meant their blackmail plan was based on completely wrong information. They were planning to trade that information for immunity, I said slowly. Agent Martinez nodded. We suspected something like that. She closed the folder. Which is why your decision to come forward was very wise. Mr. Whitaker exhaled. So Linda's inheritance is legitimate? Completely. Every dollar was legally earned under federal authorization. Relief rushed through me so fast it almost hurt. The house, the money, everything Richard had left me, was safe. But Agent Martinez wasn't finished. There's one more thing you should know. What's that? Your daughter and son-in-law contacted our office last night. My stomach tightened again. What did they say? They claimed to have evidence of a large-scale money laundering operation run by your husband. Of course they did. They requested immunity in exchange for providing that information. Agent Martinez smiled slightly. But there's a small problem with their plan. What problem? She closed the folder and looked directly at me. They tried to blackmail the one person who already knew the truth. My pulse quickened. What happens to them now? Agent Martinez's voice turned cool. Well, first they'll be arrested for fraud. Then for attempted extortion. And possibly for interfering with an active federal investigation. Which meant Ashley and Kevin had accidentally made their situation much worse. Agent Martinez stood and gathered the files. Mrs. Parker, I believe your daughter and her husband are about to have a very long conversation with federal agents. I swallowed. When? She glanced at her watch. Probably in about. She paused. 20 minutes. But what none of us realized yet was that Ashley had already taken one last desperate step to save herself. A move so reckless, it would drag this entire situation into the national news. And when that happened, my quiet little life in Charleston would never be the same again. You'd think the craziest part of my story would be the fraud, or the arrests, or discovering my husband had secretly worked with federal agents for over a decade. But honestly, the strangest part came 6 months later, because that's when I finally realized something. Losing everything was actually the best thing that ever happened to me. Let me explain. After my meeting with Special Agent Martinez, things moved fast. Very fast. Within hours the FBI confronted Ashley and Kevin about their little immunity deal. Apparently Kevin walked into the meeting acting like he was about to save the government months of investigative work. He had a folder, documents, notes about Richard's so-called criminal operation. According to Agent Martinez, Kevin actually smiled when he handed them over. Like he thought he was negotiating a business merger. Then the agents told him something that wiped the grin right off his face. My husband had been working with the FBI the entire time. Everything Kevin thought was evidence of crime was actually evidence of a federal investigation. And just like that, his big bargaining chip became a confession. Instead of walking out with immunity, he walked out in handcuffs. Ashley wasn't far behind. Turns out the charges stacked up quickly. Fraud, forgery, financial exploitation, attempted extortion, interfering with a federal investigation. The list was long. The news picked up the story within days. A wealthy couple arrested for trying to steal millions from a widow while accidentally exposing a federal crime investigation? Yeah. The media loved that headline. Reporters called nonstop. Morning shows wanted interviews. A documentary producer even contacted me about turning the story into a series. But the strangest moment came the day I walked back into my house, knowing it was truly mine. No lies. No secrets. Just mine. For the first time in decades, I began changing things. Richard had always liked the house a certain way. Dark wood furniture. Heavy curtains. Everything formal. But now I opened the windows. Painted the walls lighter colors. Turned Richard's old office into something completely different. An art studio. Because long before I became someone's wife, before I became someone's mother, I used to paint. I had forgotten that part of myself. Somewhere between raising Ashley and supporting Richard's career, That version of me quietly disappeared. But after everything that happened, she came back. The inheritance helped too, of course. $32 million gives you certain options. But the money wasn't the best part. The best part was freedom. Instead of letting the money sit in accounts, I started something new. The Parker Foundation for Elder Protection. We funded lawyers for seniors being financially abused by family members, helped pass stronger protection laws, paid for investigators to expose scams targeting older people. Because it turns out, my story wasn't unique. It happened to thousands of people every year. Most of them never fought back. 6 months later the trial ended. Ashley and Kevin both accepted plea deals. 18 months in federal prison. When the judge read the sentence, Ashley looked over her shoulder at me in the courtroom. For a second, I saw the little girl she used to be. The one who ran through sprinklers in our backyard. The one who used to hug me goodnight. But that girl was gone. The woman sitting there now had made her own choices. And choices have consequences. After the trial, Ashley wrote me letters from prison. 17 of them. I read the first 3. Apologies. Excuses. Promises to change. I never replied. Some bridges don't just burn. They collapse completely. These days my mornings look very different. I wake up early. Make coffee in a kitchen I redesign myself. Then walk into the studio and paint while the sunlight fills the room. Sometimes reporters still call. Sometimes people recognize me when I speak at conferences about elder abuse. But mostly, my life is peaceful. And every now and then I think back to that night in the cheap motel. The night my daughter told me to go somewhere else and die. Because in a strange way, she gave me a gift. She forced me to discover who I really was without anyone controlling my life. And if there's one thing I've learned from this whole experience, it's this. The most powerful revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you. It's becoming the person they never believed you could be. And trust me, that kind of revenge lasts forever.